I'm William Neal, PSF's resident sound designer and supervisor, and greetings from my home studio slash office. I've been asked to give you all a quick peek behind the scenes at some of what my work entails, and now I realize theater sound can be a really wide-ranging technical topic that can make people's eyes glaze over. So here I'm choosing to focus on one of the more musical slash creative aspects of creating the sound design for a production. We're going to look at the process of creating a music cue for Sense and Sensibility, which PSF hopes to bring to you all next summer. Now, in the show, because the piano playing talents of one of the main characters figure so prominently in the story, I've chosen to use piano music from the late classical, early romantic period for all of the framing, incidental, underscoring music cues in the show. So let's dig in. Now, when selecting music for a play, once you've read the play a few times and you've met with the director and gotten a really good idea of where they're headed creatively with the piece, the next step is to find a musical selection appropriate for each moment where a musical selection is required. There are a lot of factors that influence those choices. It has to fit really well with the intentions of the playwright and the director. It has to have the right mood for the moment. It has to have the right style for the time and the period and the place. It has to have the right instrumentation. It has to have the right feeling of movement. Some moments don't require a lot of movement. Some want to be a little more laid back. Some want to be a little more energetic. It has to, of course, be the right duration for the moment. And that leads into another question. Does it need to be flexible? Is there a monologue happening over the piece of music that, may change in timing from night to night? Is there a very complicated scene transition that might take longer or shorter period of time from one performance to the next? Does it want to comment on the events of the story in some way? And if so, how? So, those are some of the questions that we ask ourselves when we're choosing the right piece of music. Now, in this case, the cue is for a transition between scenes. So it has a couple of other specific questions that need to be addressed. It needs to connect the preceding moment to the next in some way. So you have to find a way to pick up where the dialogue left off and lead neatly into where the next piece of dialogue is going to proceed from. And it needs to propel the story forward because you don't want to get stagnant in scene transition. So let's take a look at the specific piece of music that I've chosen for this transition. It is Beethoven's Kurfürstensonaten. It's Sonata number 1 from that collection, and it's in the key of E flat major. And the movement that we're looking at specifically is the Rondo Vivace, which is the third movement in the piece. I've chosen this because it's a short transition where the setting is the same for the two scenes before and after. So only a few characters are changing. Some are leaving the stage, some are entering the stage for the following scene. So it all goes by very quickly. And this cue just functions primarily to mark a brief passage of time between the two scenes and lead us musically from one scene to the next. So let's give a look at it. Now, that was the finished cue, so let's take a step back and look at how it came to be. Once you've selected a piece of music for a moment in a show, the next step, of course, is director approval. And sometimes it can take several rounds of proposal and review to home in on just the right piece of music for the moment in the show. If a piece is not quite right, how so? Is it too fast or too slow? Is it the wrong instrumentation? Is it the wrong mood or style? Is there too much or not enough movement in the piece? It's very important to delve into these minutiae and really get the right piece of music for each moment in the show. Once the director has approved the selection, the next step, of course, is to find or create a recording of the piece to be used in the production. You may find a commercially released recording of the piece that you'd like to use, in which case you've opened up a whole other can of worms with licensing not just the recording, but the composition itself in some cases. That's why, as much as possible, I prefer to use either public domain music or else music that has been composed specifically for that production, either by myself or by someone else. In this case, of course, the Beethoven selection I've chosen is in the public domain. Now, most commonly, the musician or musicians performing the piece would have to go into a recording studio together and create an audio recording to be used in the production. In this particular instance, we use a different kind of recording technology called MIDI, which works basically like a player piano. It doesn't record the sound of the musician's performance. In fact, it doesn't record any sound at all. It captures a stream of data that defines the performance itself. Exactly when each note was hit, exactly how hard each note was hit, exactly how long each note was held before being released, that kind of thing. This gives me a huge amount of flexibility in making any adjustments that might be needed after the fact, which would not be nearly as easy, if it were even possible, with the conventional audio recording. So the process goes something like this. I emailed a PDF copy of the sheet music to our very talented pianist, Nathan Deal. Hi, Nate. Nate recorded the performance at his own convenience and then emailed the completed MIDI file back to me. Easy. So let's take a look at that original MIDI file from Nate. Lovely, but some final adjustments are usually needed, so let's take a look at some of those. Let's start with cleanup. Sometimes a wrong note gets played, or the timing of a difficult passage is a bit off. There are lots of slight imperfections that might need to be corrected. In this case, I didn't have to do any cleanup at all because Nate plays beautifully, but usually some kind of cleanup is in order. You might also have to make adjustments to the tempo, and that's something I did have to do in this case because I wanted the music to slow down at the end in a very specific way leading into the next scene. Another common adjustment you might need to make is to the key of the music. This is especially important when you're trying to make two separate pieces of music in different keys flow together musically, or also if a performer needs to sing along with the cue, as was the case in Private Lives last summer. In this particular case, the original key is fine as is. You may also want to change the instrumentation. In this case, I'm using a classic Steinway grand piano sound, but this show does take place in the early 1800s, so a designer might choose to use a historically accurate piano sound, for example, which would sound, maybe a little bit less polished, a little more twangy to the modern ear. The last kind of adjustment I want to talk about is elaboration. This is when you take a piece of music that was recorded and use that to create new material that wasn't recorded. This is something I spent a lot of time on in this cue because when I initially sent the sheet music to Nate, I specified a shorter segment for him to play, then later decided I wanted the phrase after that as well. So I took what Nate recorded and doubled it, and then changed each note in the new section to match what Beethoven wrote in that section. That gave me the human touch of Nate's playing in the added section, and the result is indistinguishable from what you'd hear if Nate had just performed the whole piece. This type of adjustment to a cue comes up pretty commonly, as you might discover during technical rehearsals that a scene transition is taking longer than expected, and you might need more music than was originally recorded. Okay, so once you've made all the necessary adjustments, you just need to export the selection as a conventional audio file for use in the production. So let's take a look at making some of these adjustments and exporting the completed cue from my editing software, Pro Tools. That was the original tempo, 133 beats per minute. Now let's slow it down to 80 beats per minute. Now let's try a faster tempo, 160 beats per minute. As I mentioned, it's also very straightforward to change the key by selecting all of the notes in the piece and moving them upward or downward in the piano roll style editor window. Here we'll change from the original key of E flat to the key of F sharp. Now we'll try the key of B flat. Easy. And it's just as easy to change the instrumentation. Here we'll try two different vintage pianos, followed by a harpsichord and even a set of church bells. Now, the church bells may seem a bit extreme, but sometimes that may be just what's called for. You can also easily apply reverberation to place the music in the context of a physical space, as it would be heard in the real world. Here, we'll try a few different options and hear how each one changes the sound of the music. Once you've got your cue sounding just how you want it, it's time to export it as a conventional audio file for playback in the production. Great, so now we have our completed audio file. What do we do with it? Well, at PSF, the playback software that we use is called QLab. QLab is designed so that with all of the preliminary programming that you've done, it just steps through a cue list in sequence and exactly as programmed executes it exactly the same consistently from performance to performance, which is very important. So let's take a look at some of the process of pulling this audio file that we've created into QLab, making some adjustments, and preparing it for playback in a performance situation. First, I create a blank audio cue, set it to target the audio file I just exported, and set a level for each speaker. If needed, I can easily create another cue to fade this cue out before it finishes playing. When it's time to perform the cue sequence, the sound operator just has to select the first cue and hit the spacebar. QLab automatically loads the next cue each time, so to step through a cue sequence, they just have to hit the spacebar once again for each cue. So that's basically the creation story of one cue out of many in one production. Repeat this process dozens more times and add in all of the chirping birds and ocean waves and thunder and knocks at the door, and you can start to see the soundscape of the production take shape. And that's a quick glimpse into some of the work that I feel so passionate about, and I've really enjoyed sharing it with you all. I hope you've enjoyed it as well and maybe learned a little something in the process. And if you'd like to hear any more about the inner workings of the sound department at PSF, please do let us know. Best wishes to you all. Please stay safe out there. I look forward to seeing you all back in the theater very soon. Be well.